Eu estou usando direto do seu pendrive, então, o computador não está conectando naquele outro.
Ele tá com o anterior, eu tinha mudado o fundo para foto.
Que coisa. Tá na raiz. Pode estar aqui dentro, talvez.
Não, é esse que tá fora, mas eu tô achando que o meu computador não gravou direito. Tem uma aí, mas é antiga.
É, que tem aqui fora não é... Que tem aqui fora não... Aqui tem... Ali dentro não tem nada de hoje.
Que coisa.
Essa daqui mesmo não é de hoje, né?
Então, e era pra ser de hoje.
Dia
2017.
Que
coisa. Porque eu mandei replace, né?
Vou fechar aqui, então você vai tentar pegar aí.
Pode ser. Não é grande diferença, mas essa visualmente é mais...
É só você salvar aqui, a hora que abrir aqui, a hora que você colocar o pendrive aqui, ele vai abrir a janela, e aí você abre aqui. Não é assim.
Eric, depois que ela abre, o que faz? Como assim? Desculpa, gente, pequeno percalço tecnológico. Hã? Ainda não sei.
Não sei nem se eu posso te ajudar.
Ele está atualizando o Office.
Quando faz isso, ele fica 50 minutos, por exemplo.
Você está aqui há quanto tempo?
No dia 17 de agosto. Então, hoje é dia 11. Quase 3 meses. Nossa. Eu cheguei aqui, eu não entendi.
O meu não vai, né?
Eu andava no...
Ou tu fez o pendrive lá?
Eu acho que foi.
Não, mas quando tá com o ar-condicionado ligado, e às vezes o maquinista fica abafado, não consigo. Às vezes nem o canal desse também aconteceu comigo. Sempre vi o problema do canal desse também não consegui entender. É o problema do som.
Mais conformado.
Muitas vezes é.
Muitas vezes assim, no trem é mais fácil.
Você tá com o passador aí, né?
Então, eu tava.
Tá, eu olhei.
Gratidão, Ernest. Vamos no nosso texto de harmonização. I know it's not in Portuguese today, it is in English. It is. So today's text is from Living Spring, from Viva. It's text 123, and it's called Living in Peace. Live in peace. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 11. Keep yourself in peace. Others will probably war against you without reason, criticizing you for the way you live your life. Nevertheless, you can continue on your pathway without warring against others. To do so, however, so that tranquility may bathe your mind, compassion and goodness must follow all your footsteps. Promise yourself that you will do all you can to avoid exasperation. If you maintain your serenity, you can analyze every event and every person in their respective place and position. Notice that a caring attitude to all those that come your way. All those who appear afflicted or desperate, irascible or violent, bear wounds or illusions. Prisoners of vanity and ignorance, they have not been able to tolerate the light of the truth. Consequently, they complain angrily. Anoint yourself with mercy and enter the recess of their being, and you will see all of them as spiritual children who feel outraged or hurt. Some accuse, others cry. Help them while you can. By pacifying their soul, you will harmonize your own life even more. Let us learn to understand each mind according to its problem. Remember that nature, always divine at heart, respects the law of balance and conserves it incessantly. Even when people are frantic in open conflict, the earth is always firm and the sun continues to shine. Living casually is normal for everybody, but living in peace with oneself is the work of a few. Let's do our initial prayer. Dear Father, of infinite love and mercy towards us, dear Master Jesus, dear spiritual mentors of our house, we thank you for one more Sunday that we are healthy enough to be here, for one more Sunday that we chose to invest in ourselves, that we chose to listen to Jesus' words, to try and learn, comprehend, feel, and live his lessons. We thank our guardian angels for their healthy suggestions that led us here today, that have led us here every time, so that we can improve ourselves, so then we can make ourselves better for us and for all of those around us, family, friends, co-workers. May today we listen with our hearts again. May today we understand what Jesus meant by love your enemies, so that we can start applying that still today and work on it a little bit every single day. So be it. Okay, so we're gonna need a bit of coordination, which is not my forte, but we will try. Hi, coming in. Okay, so today's theme is love your enemies. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. And the question is, how do I understand this maxim? But before, I have a question for you. What is a maxim? Dun, dun, dun. How can we study something when we don't even understand? And I believe in Spanish is the same. In Portuguese is máxima. As máximas de Jesus. Jesus's maxims. Confucius' maxims. Buddha's maxim. What is a maxim? All right. So now the question is going to make more sense. According to dictionary.com, a maxim is an expression of a great truth or principle. It's a principle or rule of conduct. Oh, does it make sense that Jesus would give us rules of conduct? Bang! That's a maxim. So all the prophets, apostles, and great religious leaders, they all have maxims, because a maxim is a principle or a rule of conduct. There's a piece of trivia for you on your next conversation on the elevator. Okay, so Jesus said, love your enemies, and he said that in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. So every time we use, not every time, but many times, when we use a sentence or a phrase or a maxim even out of context, sometimes it doesn't make sense, or sometimes we understand it completely wrong. Would you agree with that? If it's taken out of context? And we know that because of the whole fake news thing that is going on all around the whole world. Get one phrase, take it completely out of context, interpret the way you want, and that's news. Yeah, not really. So in order for us to understand what Jesus really meant by that, we need to understand the context. What? Does anybody remember what's in Matthew chapter 5?
I don't remember neither the questions.
Okay, so this is a New King James Bible, and one thing that is pretty neat about this one is that all the words of Jesus are in red. So first of all, what's the gospel? How is the gospel? The gospel is the New Testament, right? Yeah. And we have the Old Testament. What's the difference? Yeah, please, Diego. You're
The Old
the kids now.
Well, depending, like in Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
the Old Testament is based on Moses' rules,
Mm-hmm.
and the New Testament is Jesus' new way of looking at Moses' rules.
Okay, very good start. What does the gospel, the New Testament, what is it about?
Loving your brother, all about love.
Yeah, but it tells you something. Like the first book, Genesis tells you the story of the beginning of the world. Then the second or third book, Leviticus, gives you rules of living, like laws, rituals, whatever. Then there's a book that gives you, there's the Psalms that, give you comfort or whatever. What does the gospel give us? What does it talk about? Jesus' story. So in the New Testament, we have the 4 Gospels of 3 apostles and Luke. Luke was not in direct contact with Jesus. He came on board later, and he was coached by Paul. Paul of Tarsus, St. Paul, however you want to call him. So out of these 4 Gospels, Matthew is the first Gospel. And all 4, they actually tell the story of Jesus' postulate. It's not a biographic book because it doesn't talk about Jesus' childhood, but they tell the story of Jesus' postulate when he started teaching. And when was it? Was it ever since he was a teenager or a kid, or how long did Jesus' postulate last?
He was already a grown up. Because there's no, in the New Testament, there's basically after Jesus was 5 or 7 until he was like an adult.
Mm-hmm.
That time frame doesn't appear in the New Testament.
Exactly. Jesus' postulate lasted 3 years, from 30 to 33. Look at what he did with 3 years. Isn't it amazing? And all of that is here in the New Testament. So we have the 4 Gospels, and we have the Acts of the Apostles, and we have the letters from Peter and from Paul to several communities. Every time we say first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, first letter of Paul to the Ephesians, those were churches that Paul helped found the church. He was one of the founders of all those churches, but he was spreading the word of Jesus all around.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Why did they found these churches?
To follow Jesus as apostle.
I know, but Jesus was teaching like on the streets, right, all around.
Yeah, but one of his teachings was to help everybody in need. And the very first church in Jerusalem, that's what it did.
Okay.
Like sick people, hungry people.
But Jesus
They
went
collected
to
everybody.
the church there, and then he helped them, right? But he didn't found a church, Jesus.
No, he told his apostles
To
to.
do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I have.
Yeah, no, he told his apostles to.
Okay.
So that they could have a place to gather in his name. And then he says, everywhere there are 2 or more people gathered in my name,
Okay.
I am there.
It's like he's everywhere.
Yes. Okay. So, and those were churches that Paul helped found, but he was traveling. And every time someone came to him and said, there's a problem in this church, he would write a letter and send to them addressing the problem. So these are the letters of Paul to the Ephesians, Corinthians, or all the other churches. It helps to understand. When we study the gospel, when we say, oh, the gospel of Jesus, we think of a person just carrying a Bible under their armpit, but what is it about? It's important to understand that. So it's important to understand the context. When Jesus said, love your enemies, it was Matthew 5. And there's something very important in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And this Bible, I said, one of the neat things is that the words of Jesus are in red. So as you can see, in black are the words of the apostles, and in red is what Jesus would have said. And here, we start with chapter 5. There's a whole lot of red here. So what is in chapters 5, 6, and 7? The Sermon on the Mount. And what did Jesus do in a Sermon on the Mount? What was he doing there? he was teaching and he was telling people how to act, how to behave when you think of God as a father instead of a punishing God, a God that you should fear. Jesus broke that concept and he said, no, my Father is love. And then in the Sermon on the Mount, he was teaching how to act if you think of God as a loving father instead of fearing God. So this is in, I would say, the first 1/3 of his sermon. That's when he says, love your enemies. So right before saying this, he was talking about the law of Talion. You know the law of Talion? It's the law that says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If somebody does something to you, you are entitled to do the same thing back. Okay? And this precedes Moses, actually. This is before Moses. This is not Moses' law. This was even before him. And there were quite a few rules for that. And there were people who would enforce and judge and stuff, but we're not going to go there. So before he was saying that the whole idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is wrong. And that's where he says that if somebody slaps you, you offer the other cheek. Okay, and then right after that, it's the passage we're going to take a look at, if my computer helps. So let's read it. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So it was all part of the whole an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So here Jesus is talking about God's justice. God treats all his children the same way. The sun rises for good and bad. The rain falls for good and bad. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? So again, let's understand context. At the time, most hated people on earth were tax collectors. They weren't considered humans, right? So Jesus says, not even the tax collectors do that. They also love those who love them. And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? And again, if we think of the Jews, the way they saw pagans, it's like, whoosh. And if even pagans did that, how were they better? If they only loved those who loved them, if they only greeted their own people, how could they say they were righteous? How could they say they were virtuous? And then there's another passage that also talks about it in Luke. Oh, and another piece of trivia. There are 600 some verses that are absolutely the same or 99% the same in 3 of the Gospels. Because all 4 Gospels, I think there's 100 some in all 4. And then in 3 of them, Matthew, Luke, and Mark, they are the same. John's Gospel is a bit different from the other 3. But there are 600 some verses that are the same in 3 of them. Because all 3 tell the story of Jesus in their words, in their way. So Luke also mentioned when Jesus was talking about loving your enemies. And the way Luke said it was, the way Luke remembers what Jesus said was, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be paid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. And here we're not necessarily just talking about money, okay? Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Remember God's justice? Rain falls for everybody. The sun rises for everybody. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So Luke chapter 6, verses 32 to 36. So God is just with all his creation, right? So now we have a few questions to think about, and we're going to answer them with passages from the Gospel, from the Spirit's book, and from an amazing lecture by Alírio. And the lecture is based on the book Sublime Oração de Francisco de Assis. As some of you know, it's my favorite. So right now, we don't need to answer them out loud. We're just going to think about the answers to ourselves. And then after we see what the Spiritist doctrine has to say about these questions, then we can add our personal touch, right? So what did Jesus mean by love your enemies? What do we think he meant by that? Like open your door, invite them to a meal, hug them, lend money. What did he mean by that? Do we need to have a close relationship with our enemies in order to love them? That's another question. Why can't I hate someone who wrongs me? If Jesus tells me to love by elimination, I should not hate. But why can't? If the person is hurting me in some way, why can't I hate that person? And what do I do with that hate or anger that I have inside of me? Because I'm just going to take a guess that all of us might have been there at some point. Just a guess. Okay? So let's start with question 887 from the Spirit's book. Jesus has also said, love your enemies. But would it not be contrary to our natural tendencies to love our enemies? And does not unfriendliness proceed from a want of sympathy between spirits? So what he's asking basically is, it's unnatural to love someone who wrongs you or for whom you have some kind of antipathy, or so he's asking the spirits, like, how can we do it if it's an instinct? Aren't there some people that we don't like them even before they open their mouths? Right? There are some people that you look at the person and like, I don't like that person. They haven't spoken to me, they haven't done anything to me, and right off the bat I say I don't like that person. Like in Portuguese we have an expression that says o santo não bate. It's do you know this expression, Diego? It's like, there's no way I will ever be able to be friends with that person. Yeah, it's a very strong expression. So, what do you think the spirits answered? Dun, dun, dun. No idea? Okay, I'll help them. It would certainly be impossible for a man or woman, let's just remember, this is the 1800s. So,
Human.
yeah, human, perfect. So it would certainly be impossible for a human being to feel tender and ardent affection for his enemies. Right? Okay. And Jesus did not intend to prescribe anything of the kind. Meaning, that's not what he meant. He didn't mean I have to really love my enemy. Right? To love your enemies means to forgive them and to return good for evil. By so doing, you become their superior. By vengeance, you place yourselves beneath them.
Can I tell you something that I
Yeah.
experienced? So, sometimes you have problem with people, right? And then I read somewhere, I don't remember, that you don't like, I don't know if it was Jesus that said that you don't sit on the table the same way with your friends, and then with the people that you don't have a relationship or you don't feel like any affection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to try to not wish them anything bad, and you have to pray for them, and you have the answer.
Yes. And if it's like a real enemy, it's not just the pray for them. Because
Pray
Saint
for you
Augustine,
too, right?
yeah, and Saint Augustine says, there are some others, and Jesus says, in the Sermon on the Mount, before you pray for your enemies, forgive. There's no point praying for someone you haven't forgiven.
I always pray for me.
I will never forgive her. Oh, please God help her.
Please God help me.
How sincere is that?
Yes,
Right? How sincere is it? Okay, so this is a first good step, but we're gonna go a little deeper, all right? So this next, I think 3 or 4 slides, they are from the Gospel according to Spiritism. So this was a question from the Spirit's Flow, question 887. Now we're gonna see a passage from the Gospel according to Spiritism. When he spoke, Jesus did not mean that each one of us should have the same tenderness for an enemy as would be felt for a brother, sister, or friend. Tenderness presupposes confidence. Well, no one can deposit confidence in another person, knowing that they bear malice. How can I trust someone when I know they want to do me wrong, when I know they want to harm me in some way, maybe not physically, but slander me, say bad things about me, and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot easier to love those who we trust, right? But how can I trust someone who I know bears malice against me? Okay? Does that make sense? A whole lot more than just calling your enemy and inviting them for a meal. Between people who have no confidence amongst themselves, there cannot be the same manifestations of sympathy which exist between those who share the same ideas. Oh, can we see something similar to this when we talk about politics? Recent elections in Brazil, last week elections in the US, right? So is it easy to have sympathy? I'm not going to say love or forgive or anything. Is it easy to have sympathy for someone who has ideas that are the complete opposite of ours? Nope, not easy at all. In short,
Especially when this person trying to convince you against your
yes, they try to, preach and yeah. I know. I have the same problem in my own family. In short, no one can feel the same pleasure when they are with an enemy as would be felt when in the company of a friend, right? Okay. The diversity of feelings in these two very different circumstances is the result of a physical law. Whoa, 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 whoa. Physical law? Which is the assimilation and repulsion of vibrations. We are like radio waves. We emit a certain frequency, right? So to have someone who is in a completely different frequency that really clashes against ours, it's tough, right? So an evil thought produces a vibrational current which causes an unpleasant impression. I don't like that person. I never spoke to the person. I don't know who the person is. Why do I just feel this?
It has history from the past.
Yes. And it's also a physical law, and it's called the law of affinity. That's what brings two people together as friends or couples or family. And it's the same law that, when you clash, will send like people in complete opposite directions. Because like, I can not deal with you. Okay? So this is a physical law of attraction or affinity. And then just like the bad thought produces a negative vibration, a good thought encompasses us with a very agreeable emanation. This is the reason for the different sensations which are experienced on the approximation of a friend or an enemy. I like that person, I don't like that person. So then, to love one's enemy cannot signify that there should be no difference between the affection for an enemy and that for a friend. Yes? Good? Does it make sense? Does it help relieve the guilt of not loving dearly someone who harms you? Now we understand why. Because of the law of affinity. Okay? So, if this seems difficult to put in practice, sometimes impossible depending on the person, it's only because it was falsely understood that Jesus had ordered us to give both friends and enemies an equal place in our hearts. That's not what Jesus meant. He didn't mean we needed to have the same feelings for friends and for enemies. Therefore, to love one's enemies does not mean showing affection which would not be within our nature. Oh Lord, this is so small. Because a contact with an enemy makes your heart beat in an entirely different way than an encounter with a friend. Right? So, let's go back to the question, do we need to have a close relationship to love our enemies? Do we need to invite them over? Let them borrow our car? Right?
They
No.
don't have evil thoughts. They have thoughts.
We wouldn't even be doing that sincerely, right? So, get the Gospel according Spiritism, chapter 12, item 3. So, to love one's enemy means we should not hate nor bear rancor against them, nor desire vengeance. It means to forgive all the evil they have caused without hidden thoughts and without conditions. I'll forgive you if you never look at my face again. I'll forgive you if you never talk to me again. I forgive you, but I don't ever want to see your face. I'll forgive you if you apologize in public. Have we ever thought or done, because sometimes we don't say it out loud, but sometimes in our minds we think, if he does that, I'll forgive. If she does that, I'll forgive. Otherwise, no way. Because I have my limits, right? This is not to forgive. This is not to forgive, and this is not to love our enemies. So here we have a better idea of what it is to love your enemy. We know Chloe filled her diaper. Okay. Chloe.
It's like you have a guess. Force it in.
Well, just to show you that, yeah, sure. Okay, so what it means is, so we already know what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean to feel the same. It doesn't mean that your heart will beat the same way for a friend as for an enemy. So what it means is to forgive all the evil they have caused without hidden thoughts and without conditions. It means to not put obstacles in the way of a reconciliation. So no obstacles. And to wish them well instead of bad things. It is to feel joy instead of regret at the good things that may come their way. Because if something good happens to my enemy, oh, that drives me nuts, right? That person doesn't deserve it. They hurt me. How can God give them something good? Okay, I imagine that the smiles and laughs are because that sounds familiar. It means to help them whenever possible and to abstain by words or acts from everything which might prejudice them. So no eye for eye. We're not going to harm them back because they harmed us. Okay, what else? Finally, it means to always return goodness for evil without any intention to humiliate. So you hurt me, I'm going to forgive you. First I'm going to tell everybody what you did. And then I'm going to forgive you publicly. But first I'm going to tell everybody what you did. See what they mean by humiliate? I will only forgive you if you tell everybody what you did. Whosoever, like, you know, whatever, whenever, whatever. So whosoever, anybody who can proceed in this manner fulfills the conditions of the commandment. Love your enemies. Does that make sense? That was a very, very deep breath, a sigh, I would say. Okay, now, why can't I hate someone who wrongs me? Isn't it my right to hate someone who wrongs me? Isn't it my right to be mad? In English, they have a little saying, don't get mad, get even. And a lot of people say, yeah, that's it. Get even. Oh, doesn't that remind me of an eye for an eye? Which like 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, that's not the way to go. I am a very good Christian, but don't step on my toes. Yeah, there's something very wrong with that sentence, right? No, let's break down that question. Can I hate someone? Can I?
You can, but you shouldn't.
Ah, there we go. God gave us freedom, right? So we can. Can I? Oh, of course I can. I can anything I want. Question is it a good idea? Is it a good choice? Nope, not at all. Okay, because those who only believe in this present life, for them, it might seem like a good idea to get even, because you know, you do it to me, I'll do it to you. I'm nobody's doormat. Nobody fools me. Right? So for those who only believe in this life, that kind of makes sense. Even if we go further, nowadays still happens a lot, but not as much as in the past. The idea of getting rid of an enemy, like by killing the enemy. If you only think about this life, this incarnation, okay, not justifiable, but I can understand. However, if we have the knowledge that we are mortal spirits, first thing we need to remember is something that Renata has already said. Maybe we might have done them wrong first, but we don't remember. Right? So when we know, when we have the knowledge, when we feel that we are immortal spirits, that we are apprentices of life, we will understand that that person is here to learn as much as we are. And maybe that repulsive feeling we feel for each other is exactly because we already had problems in the past. Then the question is, how long do we want to drag this? How many incarnations more do we want to drag this? And again, forgiving doesn't mean that we're going to knock on their door and say, I love you now, because Jesus said I should. No, it starts with forgiving without hidden thoughts, forgiving without conditions. Don't put obstacles in a reconciliation, because sometimes they try to come to us and we're like, nope, you already did that to me once. I'm not going to give you a chance to do it twice. Right? We put these obstacles, but when we think that we are immortal spirits and that we cannot remember what we did before this life as a means of protection for ourselves, because it could be really overwhelming to remember everything we did, it doesn't make sense anymore. Right? Okay. Then in question, oops, where am I? Nope, there. Ah. Question 879, Kardec asks, what would be the character of the man who should practice justice in all its purity? And the Spirit say, that of true justice. After the example of Jesus, after means following the example of Jesus, because they would practice both charity and love towards their neighbor, without which there can be no real justice. Right? How can there be real, true justice if we're still trying to harm someone else? If we're still trying to do an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? So we need to remember that God is supremely just. He's absolutely fair and good. Right? And he communicates to us through his laws, through the divine laws. The sun rises for everybody. The rain falls for everybody. So everybody has fairly the same conditions in the world. So when we talk about, oh, but what about someone who's poor? What about someone who is handicapped and stuff? That is something more detailed that definitely relates to whatever they need to repair from past mistakes. It's a situation that we get ourselves into. It's the consequence of our own actions. But physical laws are for everybody, right? God doesn't differentiate us when it comes to physical laws, to biological laws. It's the same for everybody. And that's justice. And what is God's greatest law? What's God's greatest law? Just to help, it's a triad. It's 3 in 1. Yep. It's the law of love, justice, and charity. And like we saw in the previous answer, it says, because they would practice both charity and love. So when we practice love, which by the way starts with ourselves, when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, we can't love our neighbors if you don't learn to love ourselves first. So love starts with ourselves. And then we move to charity, which is how we treat others, how we feel about others. And once we fulfill these two, justice is simply a consequence. Because if there's true love in my feelings and my actions, true charity in my feelings and my actions, the inevitable result is justice. When I treat everybody the way I like to be treated, I'm being fair, right? Okay, so what do I do with that hate or anger I have inside me? Remember, that was the last question from one of the previous slides with all the questions. So what do I do with that? First thing, we need to understand what is that hate? What's that anger that we feel for other people?
Stuff that triggers you to feel it, I guess. The reason to why.
Well, the why is something else. The why is because of something they did to you. But my question is actually simpler than that. So what is hate? What is anger? Hate and anger, they are lack of love. They are the dark. How do I get rid of the dark? All right, light. Because hate and anger, they are egotistic feelings. They are our hurt pride. Why am I offended by something that somebody did to me? Because that hurts my pride. So that's darkness. That's the nothing. And once I shine light on the dark's gone. So if anger and hate are darkness, what's the light? Well, it goes through that for sure. Exactly. Okay, so we have already discussed that, but there are a few more questions. So is our anger and hate essential feelings? Like, are they light? Because we have egotistic feelings, the feelings that come from our ego, and we have essential feelings, the feelings that come from our true being, from what God made us. Okay, so it's not an essential feeling. So where does it come from? It comes from the lack of love, right? And how do I get rid of darkness? I need to shine a light. And the light for hate will always be love. And again, starting with myself. Always starting with myself. Okay, so is it an easy thing? No. Is it difficult?
It's hard work.
Exactly. It's hard work. And why do we avoid to use the word difficult? Because the moment we say it's difficult, this is just neurolinguistics. The moment we say it's difficult, we are giving ourselves an excuse not to make an effort. So that's why we avoid the word difficult. We say it's hard work. because it takes exercises. Small examples, like one instance that I realized I'm angry at someone, then I'm going to work on that one. And next time it happens, as soon as I realize, I'm going to work on that one. So it's constant exercise, right? It's like a muscle. We need to exercise it. And what's the first step to do that? What's the first step? To bring light to the darkness, to replace that hate with love.
Try to do things that are going to make you feel better about yourself, and then everything starts from there.
Actually, that's the second step. There's one before that.
Okay.
We need to make the decision. Before we act, we need to decide to act. Because sometimes we think about it, and then we forget it. And we think about it, and then we forget it. And we think about it, and then we forget it. So first we realize, then we need to decide to forgive because it's hard work, right? So ask ourselves, do I really want to forgive? Do I want to replace hate with love? Do I want to shine light onto the darkness? Or do I still feel some level of satisfaction hating those who wrong me? And that's a question for all of us to think deep inside. Do we still feel some satisfaction hating some people just because we think they deserve it? Am I ready and willing to pay the price for that or not? Price for forgiveness? What's the price for forgiveness? One of the prices could be to be considered weak for forgiving. Right? Mm-hmm. Some people consider forgiveness weakness. Don't get mad, get even. So one of the prices is to be considered weak. Another, and I would say the biggest price, is just the effort we have to make. The exercises of self-reflection, of acknowledging the feeling, then deciding to work on it, and reflect, how can I work on it? How can I make this better for myself, right? If the principle of charity is to love one's neighbors, then to love one's enemies is the most sublime application of this same principle, seeing that the possession of this virtue represents one of the greatest victories which can be achieved against selfishness and pride. It's beating our own selfishness and pride. And that's what elevates us. That's what makes us better, not better than anybody else, better than we were yesterday. We cannot be better than anybody else. We can only be better than ourselves. I know this is a little cliche, but it's the absolute truth. Nobody has the same history we have. Nobody has been through the exact same experiences we have. All of us, billions, trillions, zillions of souls in the whole universe. There isn't a single one that is exactly the same as the other. We all have absolutely different and individual pathways. None has had the exact same reactions to the same situations. We are individualities. We are all different. So there's no point trying to measure myself against Danielle. We haven't had the same experiences. So I can only be better than I was yesterday or even this morning, not than anybody else. Because every time I try to develop my virtues just to be better than my enemy, I am missing the point. Because everything starts with us. Everything starts with the self. Self-love, everything. Because if we can't do it for ourselves, how can we extend it, right? And I'll leave you with this anonymous, some people attribute this to Buddha, but it was not Buddha who said it. There are several different ones throughout history, but holding on to hate and anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Right? Any questions or comments? Okay, do the kids have something? Yeah, okay.
Very good.
Yeah. So the sources and, well, yeah. And this picture actually says a lot because we're giving free ourselves from the negative feelings and from having to act based upon other people instead of us. Yeah. They're having stage fright.
Music. So today, I guess Renata has talked a little bit about this. But to love someone, we have to learn how to love ourselves. And we keep telling kids to love, 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 and their self-esteem is usually pretty low. So we try to work the conscience of loving themselves. And we went through a story, they made this beautiful crafting, and we have a little music that we will try to sing. Sorry, well, not to sing, because this guy is very heavy. The name of the music is called I Like You As You Are. And do you guys remember how to sing? What happens when I point you?
I like you as you are.
Okay, good job. So,
I like you as you are.
exactly and precisely. I think you turn out nicely, and I
Like
You as you are. I like you as you are.
without a doubt or question, or even a suggestion, 'cause
Like you as you are.
I like your disposition, your facial composition, and with your kind permission, I will shout it to a star.
I like you as you are.
I wouldn't want to change you, or even rearrange you, not by far.
I like you, I-L-I-K-E-Y-O-U. I like you, yes I do. I like you, Y-O-U. I like you, yes you. Good job.
Awesome!
All right. Everybody?
Okay, so we're gonna do our final prayer. Let's close our eyes. Dear Father, dear Jesus, we thank you for being here today. We thank you for our health, for the food on our tables, for the roof over our heads. We thank you, Lord, for we have so much more than we need. Today, and special, we want to thank all the people who 80 years ago fought for Canada, all the people who fought for the freedom that we have today. We understand, Lord, that nothing happens without your permission, not even wars. And if you, Father, deemed necessary that the whole planet went through the war so that we could learn the value of peace, so that we could learn the value of forgiveness, then today all we can do is thank you and thank all of those who were involved in somehow giving us this country that we have today. A country which is free, a country that welcomed us or our families before us, that provides our sustaining, that embraces us as we all are. Thank you to our mentors in our house. Thank you to the mentors of the Spiritist movement in Canada. And may we be able to be a small dot of light. May we be able to bring through Spiritism a little more reflection to help these people who are already good to become even better. Thank you, Lord. So be it.